Welcome in to the Fun Astrology Podcast from New Digs. Thomas Miller in here giving it a spin to see what we got. We might find out a few things together. This is the weekly financial newsletter that we read from MMAcycles.com every weekend. A little late, but understandable when you're trying to find everything in boxes. This is for the week of April 21st, and Ray Merriman is taking the weekend off. In his place this weekend is Puyan Zalfagarnia. He's been a frequent guest columnist, and Ray will be off next weekend as well. Let's get started with the review for this week. This is from Fox Business, entitled Billionaire Hedge Fund Manager Warns That Tariffs Could Trigger Conditions, quote, worse than a recession. Ray Dalio said that while recessions occur regularly, what appears to be occurring now is much more profound, he said, as if there was a breaking down of the monetary order involving the dollar, along with a breakdown of the domestic and world order, end quote, which, even during a move, has been the one thing that I've been concerned about personally. Now, Puyan's comments for this week, he says in the review section that sentiments are not strong in the markets, as we saw all major U.S. indices sell off into the week, following last week's collective rally. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 4.5% following Tuesday's high. The S&P and NASDAQ formed highs last week and were also down 5 and 6.5% respectively. And yes, emphasis here mine, that's in 1 week. The picture was the same in Europe, where the Euro Stoxx 50 and Germany's DAX had a muted up week as investors took stock of what may be unfolding. The UK's FTSE, on the other hand, appeared a lot more confident, rallying 4% in the hope of a special relationship, quote-unquote, with the United States. In Asia, the Nikkei and the Chinese markets continued their corrective rallies, closing marginally higher on the week. Australia was the same story. However, India's Nifty stands out, closing above its multi-month highs and was testing the high of January. Brazil's Bovespa index is also rallying, but like most other equity markets, the rally appears corrective in nature. We saw many of the global equity markets drop into and then reverse sharply at the Venus Station Direct on April 12th with an orb of 1 week. Ray provided a timely webinar in which he explained that the short-term lows may be in, and a 4% or greater rally could be expected in the U.S. equity markets, ! However, the big question is whether this was a low of significance or if markets will reverse back down. For greater insight, I would recommend getting in touch with the MMA team to gain access to this informative webinar. Amongst the chaos, gold remains the shining star, reaching a new all-time high of $33.7190 on Friday. Both silver and copper are lagging behind and have failed to take out the highs of late March. The cryptocurrencies continue to consolidate and have not shown their hands yet. The grains had a good week, with wheat and soybeans continuing their rallies, but they still have some way to go before reaching the highs of February, and thus confirming the longer-term bullish outlook. Crude oil closed the week higher, climbing to $64.18 as the U.S. increased the sanctions on Iran ahead of the second round of talks this Saturday. Now the short-term geocosmics section. A quick quote from Thursday's Wall Street Journal. President Trump is threatening to fire Reserve Chair Jerome Powell unless he cuts interest rates to cushion the blow from his tariffs, end quote. Now, Puyan's short-term forecast. He says in the 2025 forecast book, Ray wrote a chapter on the Federal Reserve Board. I thought it might be timely to share a few sentences that really got my attention. Quoting now from Forecast 2025. The Fed seems destined to be vulnerable to power plays from the federal government. At any point, the Fed's independence as the nation's central bank can be revoked by the government. That vulnerability is shown by the Sun in Capricorn in opposition to Pluto in Cancer. So, he goes on to explain, we may have a case where someone, or some entity, is slandering the Fed or its chair as part of a maneuver to gain power and control of the nation's central bank by eliminating the chair or the institution, the bank, itself. The message here is that a powerful force may try to take away the independence of the Fed, and do so in a very underhanded and deceptive manner." End quote. I remember that section well when narrating it to the audiobook. Pouillon says when he read this, he immediately pulled up the chart of President Trump, who has his sun in the 12th house of hidden enemies for the Federal Reserve Board. He also has his natal Saturn placed prominently on top of the Fed's ascendant, suggesting a desire to take control of or restrict the board's ability to operate. With the U.S. dollar trading at multi-year highs in January, I share the opinion of my great colleague and currency analyst, Ulrich Aspegren, who provided an astounding analysis on the U.S. dollar at the 2024 investment retreat. He felt that a long-term crest may have formed in the U.S. dollar in 2022. Putting all of that together, the sharp decline of over 10% in the U.S. dollar does not come as a surprise to the MMA community, and really goes to show the beauty in the methodology and the rich insight that astrology can provide in many aspects of life. Looking at the week ahead, the Sun will leave Aries and ingress into Taurus on Saturday. As the Sun changes signs, we will see a shift in trading psychology. We may see the optimism of the Aries fire sign hit the cold skepticism of the Taurus earth sign. We are also at the April 18th to 21st critical reversal date and anticipating an important reversal in the markets within a 3-day orb of the Easter weekend. You can follow the implications of this on the various markets we cover within the MMA Weekly Report. Now, the longer-term thoughts and opinions. Another quick quote from the Wall Street Journal on Thursday. During his nomination hearing in January, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that NVIDIA chips drove the development of DeepSeek's model and that such American assistance has to end. If they're going to compete with us, he said, let them compete, but stop using our tools to compete with us. End quote. Pouillon says this is not the first time the United States has taken deliberate steps to shield its domestic workforce from the perceived threat of a more efficient Chinese labor force. In researching the upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction, reaching near-exact alignment this summer and then culminating on February 20th, 2026, I was struck by how deeply rooted this theme is. It has surfaced repeatedly during past Saturn-Neptune cycles, revealing a long-running pattern. One of the reasons I find synodic cycles so powerful for studying history is their ability to reveal enduring energetic patterns that transcend any single nation's birth chart. This cycle, therefore, remains highly relevant, despite China's political and ideological transformation following the Communist Revolution of 1949. U.S.-China relations began on economic rather than political terms. In the late 18th century, the United States was eager to participate in the lucrative tea, silk, and porcelain trade. The first American ship to reach China, named the Empress of China, docked in Canton in 1784. That marked the beginning of commercial contact. However, formal diplomatic ties were not established until after the First Opium War, culminating in the Treaty of Wanghia in 1844. This treaty, which granted the U.S. most favorable nation status, came into effect during the 1846 Saturn-Neptune conjunction and reflected a spirit of idealist expansionism and diplomatic goodwill, both archetypal of Neptune's influence. By the next conjunction of 1882, the tone had shifted dramatically. It had moved into a more Saturnian phase, characterized by fear, exclusion, and boundary building. In the decades leading up to this point, tens of thousands of Chinese laborers migrated to the United States, enduring grueling conditions, particularly in railroad construction. Following the Panic of 1873 and the resulting economic downturn, Chinese immigrants became convenient scapegoats, accused of undercutting wages and taking jobs. This culminated in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first major U.S. law to ban immigration based on ethnicity. It also denied Chinese residents the right to naturalize as citizens. Notably, this law remained in effect, at least in part, until just before the 1952-53 Saturn-Neptune conjunction. The 1882 cycle ended with deep economic resentment, legal exclusion, and radicalized mistrust, all hallmarks of Saturn's shadow. The 1917 conjunction brought a renewed sense of Neptunian cooperation. Under pressure from the U.S. and its allies, China declared war on Germany, hoping its support would be rewarded at the peace table with the return of lost territories. This marked one of the earliest instances of U.S.-China alignment in a global military and diplomatic context. The Neptunian theme of idealistic alliance and shared purpose prevailed. Yet, by the time of the 1952-53 conjunction, darker Saturnian energies resurfaced. Amid the early Cold War, the U.S. imposed strict trade embargoes on China, especially after the Korean War. Mao was consolidating power, and the ideological divide between capitalist America and communist China became a defining rift. The U.S. responded by foregoing strategic alliances throughout East Asia, Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore, as part of a containment strategy aimed at isolating China. It was a classic Saturnian maneuver: build walls, draw lines, and limit influence. Fast forward to the 1989 conjunction, and we witnessed yet another shift. Despite the Tiananmen Square crackdown, the U.S. imposed only limited sanctions. Instead, American corporations began investing heavily in Chinese manufacturing, ushering in an era of economic cooperation. The Neptunian ideals of globalization and free trade gained traction, even within the framework of communist China. This cycle marked the beginning of a complex and enduring economic entanglement, where ideological differences were set aside in favor of market-driven interdependence. I hope I've been able to demonstrate the rhythmic pendulum swing between Neptune's idealistic, unifying energies and Saturn's darker tendencies toward fear, division, and control, a dance that has long shaped the course of U.S.-China relations. As we approach the next Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it seems we are once again leaning into Saturn's shadow: suspicion, protectionism, and rising walls, i.e. trade barriers. Yet today, these two nations are no longer peripheral players. They are the twin engines of the global economy. The consequences of their friction will not remain confined to national borders. They will reverberate across the globe. Fittingly, this conjunction will unfold along the vernal axis, emphasizing that what is at stake is not just bilateral diplomacy, but the future trajectory of humanity itself. So on this Easter weekend, a time of renewal and resurrection, I pray that the United States might break free from the gravitational pull of its past and choose not to repeat the patterns of fear, exclusion, and confrontation that have defined prior cycles in its relationship with China. At the same time, I pray for the evolution of the great Neptunian experiment, communism, which was seeded under the 1848 Saturn-Neptune conjunction with the birth of the Communist Manifesto. This Neptunian dream has evolved and been marked by important turning points in human history at every Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Perhaps now, in light of emerging technologies, this dream might finally shed its shadow and grow into something more inclusive and more humane. And that is this week's newsletter. Thank you, Puyan, for your thoughts, and I will see you back on Monday, and I'm happy my booth works. Have a great Easter weekend. I'll see you back on Monday.